Okay, 30 minutes on the clock. I really like this topic. So I'm going to make sure to go through everything I can. If I look down, that's me checking my phone for the make sure I'm on time with slides and counts of want to make sure we use our 30 minutes wisely together. Hello. My name is Sylvia Artiga Montreal. I use she, her pronouns, and this is a quick little introduction to an idea I call career weaving. I'm pulling together a few different concepts for this that we'll explore. But if you're familiar with the chaos theory of careers, or sometimes called happenstance theory, or anything about identity based career development, like working identity, we'll be pulling on concepts from books like this and hopefully putting it in a nice little package for you to experiment with after today. You will need, well, you don't need, I would recommend grabbing a piece of paper and something to write with. We are going to be going through a few different activities together. While you grab that, if need be, I'm going to introduce myself. So, as I said, my name is Sylvia Artiga Mondreal. I use she, her pronouns. I have a background in career coaching, learning development. I'm a huge Aquarius. I feel like everything about an Aquarius, I'm always like, yes, that's me. And I like to play video games in my free time. I also currently work as the director for student affairs for Ada Developers Academy, which is a coding training program, a nonprofit coding training program for folks who are looking to start a career in tech, especially through coding. Happy to share more about that at the end, but we're going to talk about y'all more than me today. Hopefully, that bought you enough time to get settled in, get something to write with, something to write on. It could just be a new page in your journal, whatever you're using to take notes with. Alrighty, I'm going to be switching to my slides, and I won't be able to see the chat as frequently as I like to, but I'll try to keep an eye on any comments. So you might be thinking to yourself, maybe throughout this whole event, maybe as you're getting started for this event, this is an interesting time to do career planning. This is an interesting time to think about our careers. This is an interesting time to be thinking about career moves. And maybe you've always had some difficulties wrapping your head around this idea of careers, whether that was because it's not exciting, because it's boring, or you, like me, grew up hearing go to college and then that was it. And then everything else would magically happen after that. It turns out the whole rest of our lives happens and keeps happening. So I understand if the idea of planning a career maybe isn't the most exciting or opening idea. I really appreciate you going to a career development workshop nevertheless. And hopefully I could give you a new framework for thinking about this. Oh, how exciting. I'll do another Aquarius. Hello, hello. Glad you're able to make it today. So I want to validate that feeling. Like I said, it could be a limiting belief, it could be an old fashioned belief. It's also just not great science. The idea of career planning, as we're typically taught it, career planning, as most of us encounter it, was developed in the aftermath of World War II when there was a lot of veterans returning from their services and they needed to place them in jobs. It was very much like, what are your traits? Okay, let's place you in an environment. We are not that context anymore for 12,000 reasons. That is not how we think about work. That's not how our lives are organized. That's not how our society is organized. It also is very disempowering, even in that analogy of what are your traits? Let me put you in this environment, right? It is putting all the emphasis on the work environment, what's most efficient, what is easiest for the employer. That doesn't feel great as an individual to think of ourselves as little cogs that fit into a machine. So it's very disempowering to think about careers in this way. And it's very restraining, right? It only thinks about your value to this potential employer. What are your traits in this context? How can we maximize your efficiency? So that is not a very stimulating way to think about ourselves, let alone what we do for careers. And it's very isolating. It pulls on just certain elements of us. Maybe there was something that you were identified with as a kid growing up. I was a good reader. And now for the rest of my life, I got to be a good reader. That's who I am. That's one way to pigeonhole me. That does not let me move on to new hobbies or I'm not reading as much as I used to. Does that mean I have nothing to offer? Of course not. So this is probably very familiar to us, or at least articulating feelings we tend to have when we think about planning our careers. Maybe we feel like they're outdated, that they just don't feel great to use. They feel like they're turning this into machines versus letting us be people. and they really limit us. They only take a few aspects of us, and if we're lucky, those are aspects of us that we're excited about. But for some of us, they're taking less exciting aspects of ourselves. What to do with all this? All right. Well, hopefully, we could start to move to at least better science, better research, better modalities. So again, I'm condensing the work of many great writers to provide you this next slide. But this what's bringing me to this idea of weaving a career instead of planning a career. I like to think about weaving a career. How can we update our model for planning careers, right? Update it with what we know about industrial industrial organizational psychology, human psychology, what is efficient in a workplace, how do teams actually work together, bring in concepts of life design to understand that this is a very complicated thing. It's not just taking a person off a shelf and putting them in an environment. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I like these ways of thinking about careers in that they restore our humanity, right? We're a whole person. We're not just our efficiency. We're not just our job titles. We're not just the skills that we were told are great. We are all the things we bring. And through that, maybe we can feel re-empowered or empowered, repositioned, if nothing else, as people who come from communities, who come from cultures, who come from backgrounds, and not just employees who need to be efficient. So hopefully that sounds enticing. Hopefully that sounds like something you want to try to learn more about. This idea of weaving a career instead of planning your career, even in this tumultuous environment. Um, if nothing else, I have one more little idea to kind of prove the value of this way of approaching careers, and that is a quick question for y'all. I'll put it up on the slides in just a moment, but I want you to think about the job that you currently have or most recently had. How did you hear about that job? Like, really think about it. Maybe there's a default answer of like, oh, it was uh, because I was in a job search. Try to be really specific. How did you first learn about your current position or your most recent position? If you're in school, how did you learn about your major? If you're in between roles, uh, maybe think about your current opportunity or even this event, if nothing else. Try to get very specific. And I would love to see it in the chat as I pull up these questions. How did you hear about your current position, current opportunity, and if you could put those answers in the chat and try to be specific. So, for instance, I mentioned my title is Director of Student Affairs, and I could say, oh, yeah, well, I was exploring a lot of different things. I was a little bored in my previous role, but the specific learning of this opportunity was an ad served to me on LinkedIn. It was an ad that I saw, um, not even a job search that I had was clicking on. They give you a big old list of job titles on LinkedIn, and one of them was an ad. So it was that specific. Okay, being referred to someone from your boot camp. Yeah, on Slack. Yes, a Slack message. You just open Slack that day, or maybe you're actively checking it. It's a great example. Getting sent information by an advisor. Oh, Boolean Google search. Yeah. Ooh, I like that. A really expert level Boolean search of putting in the last 24 hours. Checking a website, checking. I could see going to a newsletter. Being referred again. Went to a networking event. Yeah. Yeah, you're to keep them coming, but I hope you're starting to see a pattern here in that there's kinda, like, not a pattern to it. Um, I'm gonna I kinda stack the deck of themes I tend to hear when I hear this question brought up of families or friends. This is called, like, our soft network. Um, people mention, like, "Oh, an advisor, uh, a client, an ex-colleague, ex-boss." Um, right place, right time. I think checking social media accounts. Sometimes this is physically being the right space, right time. You just happen to go with a friend to that event, walk by the right booth. Back in the day, you would see the poster on the bulletin board, right? And I also put in this line if you give a mouse a cookie, which if you haven't read that book in a while, is like if you give a mouse a cookie, he'll want milk. And if you give him milk, there's this. And so sometimes you have to pull the layers back of like, all right, it was because I talked to this recruiter, but I met the recruiter because I went with my friends, so they wouldn't be alone at the event. And the event was supposed to be on another day, and it was a free ticket anyways. You could see there's all these little layers sometimes when you think about your current position. Announcement posted in Slack, previous supervisor. For some of y'all, not to put too much pressure on any upcoming job fairs, uh, this might be the beginning of that story for your next role. Because you decided to show up to this event, because you clicked on that session, because you connected with that person on LinkedIn afterwards, 4 steps later, you hear about a title, you hear about, um, you see the Slack message, you're in the event where this is announced. Um, let's see, I'm seeing if anyone else on Slack has stories to share, but thank you all so much for sharing. It could be a variety of places. And the official term for this is the chaos theory of careers. I learned about chaos theory through Jurassic Park and the character of Ian Malcolm, but I won't get into the math of it for that reason. But it has its origins in math. The idea of chaos theory is that these things that appear random to us are not random. They're actually just so complicated, we sometimes do not see those actions that contribute it. The classic analogy for chaos theory is a butterfly flaps its wings, and on the other side of the world, that little change in air pressure results in a hurricane, right? In careers, you all saw it. You met a person, and they just happened to see a job listing. They referred it to you. You just happened to get in the Slack workspace, and someday someone posted the link. You happen to select that college, have that advisor referred you to it. These are not necessarily random things. It's just the equations that are happening are so big and it's so complex, it's over years that it appears random. Weather is like this a lot. And I like the weather metaphor because we don't, even though we know weather can be so big and it's essentially random to us, it's not like we don't plan for it. I'm in Seattle. It's a rainy day today. And it tends to be rainy in September. So I have put away most of my summer clothes and I've started pulling out my sweatshirts, my raincoats. There are some things I can do, even though at the end of the day, the weather is essentially random to me. It's so big and complicated. And our careers can be that same premise. Just because we bring in this idea of chaos into understanding our careers doesn't mean we do nothing. Doesn't mean we throw up our hands and say, whatever happens, happens. It means like, okay, so how can I start to prepare for this? Hopefully by now you're seeing why that old model of thinking about careers, make a plan, stick to the plan, find your one right job, doesn't work when we remember what actually happens. It's about the people we know, it's about the situations we put ourselves in, it's about who we follow up with. Those are the things that actually lead to jobs. And kind of the thesis of modern career development is then how can we be better at making lots of plans and being ready to take advantage of these situations when they pop up? How can we kind of plan for the unplannable to happen? And hopefully you have a piece of paper by now because we're going to get into one of those activities so you could test out career theory in your own career development. All right, so I'm going to walk us through a quick activity that's inspired by life design. If you ever heard of the book Designing Your Life, there's elements of that there. I've just updated it for this audience and I think works a little bit better for our everyday work. We're going to talk about weaving now. We're going to weave a little career plan. I like the analogy of weaving because I think one, it feels better than chaos. Even though I'm a big fan of chaos, it can get overwhelming. I like weaving because there's something very familiar about it. For a lot of us, it's in our culture. I have lots of nice woven blankets that my mom brings me from El Salvador. And it's just a nice tactile way of thinking about people making things for our jobs and for our job planning. It also gives us this opportunity to think about what would it look like to plan when you choose the materials, when you choose what you want to consider, not just your future employers, not just what someone told you is your most efficient traits, but what you want to weave with. Are you going to weave with cotton or silk, for instance? There's also a specific usage. When we weave, we have to decide, am I going to make a blanket or a mitten? I don't even know if you make mittens by weaving, but you get the idea. We're not planning for our whole lives. We're not planning for every career we could possibly have. We're being very specific with our plans, and it's very time bound. At some point, our project has to end. Usually, when we think about career plans, it's our whole lives. Now we're an adult and we have to make a career plan for the next 40, 50 years. That's not very helpful. Let's think about something more specific so that we can alter it. Um, Also, in this image in the bottom left, you can see the punch cards. I didn't know this until I started working at a place named after Ada Lovelace. Some of the first computers were these punch cards used to program looms. So you could see some of the thread in the background. So weaving, fiber arts, working with our hands can be dismissed or at least made very separate from more technical, uh, modern careers, but they're actually very connected. So just a little shout out to punch cards and looms here in the bottom left before we move on from this imagery. Okay, so let's try this out. Let's do a little small weaving activity together. This would be the equivalent of, if you've ever had a hand loom, or they tend to do this in arts and crafts with kids, like make a little uh, cozy to put a hot pan on. That's the equivalent what we're going to try today. We're not going to make a huge blanket with our time together. The first step is to activate our imaginations a little bit. Today, it's October 1st, 2025. And I want you to start imagining yourselves 1 year from now. We're not planning our whole lives. We're not saying we're going to figure out even the next 5 years, just the next 12 months. And we're going to be specific about it. We're not figuring out everything in our lives then, just kind of getting a snapshot of this day. So maybe hopefully you've had some caffeine. You can start to imagine, all right, who am I? What am I up to October 1st, 2026? If it helps, you could put your responses in the chat, but you could also just jot this down on the paper that you have. I want you to think about who's with you, right? You're gathering your materials here. This is going to be at the top of your notes. If you have that piece of paper, you can make kind of a T chart at the top. Right now, you can just like draw a line. At the top, we're gathering our materials. We're doing a little bit of manifestation, a little bit of visioning, however you want to call it. What do you want in your life on October 1st, 2026? Who are you spending time with? How are you planning your weeks? What are you looking forward to in your days on October 1st, 2026, a year from now? And you could jot those down on a piece of paper over a line at here at the top of our T chart. Or you could put it in the chat if that's helpful for you. I know sometimes that could be helpful. Some of the things that might be coming up for you, I mentioned these questions. I'm just going to go past this because I want to get through all the different parts of our exercise. So at the top, I might put something like, "Oh, I want to be presenting at this summit next year." That would be kind of fun to have October 1st, 2026. Or I want to be planning my week around taking a nice hike with my dogs. Uh, I want to have fun. I want to have a fun day at work. Or maybe there's someone that you want to make sure you're providing for. For me, that might look like, my daughter really likes swimming. I want her to have swimming classes. This is not my whole life. This is not even everything in 2026. It's just a little snapshot of what I would like to see on October 1st, 2026 for me. I'm going to pause a little bit so y'all have a time to actually write something down. I've been talking at you this whole time. Usually when we think about our careers, we automatically start with, what do I need to do? What do I don't like? What is not bringing me a lot of energy? So I want to start off this activity with bringing back some of the things we want to look forward to. What do we want to have in our weeks? What would be a highlight of our day? Who do we actually want to be thinking about with our time? Hopefully that activates your imagination in that more positive way. These are your materials that you're going to weave with. Usually, when we're planning about careers, if we stay in that deficit base of, I have to do this or this needs to change, it can be hard to think creatively from that place. We might fall back into that very fixed, outdated sense of making a plan that has to work. Hopefully, we're thinking about activities and peoples and things that keep us more in touch with emotions that are a bit more optimistic, a bit more energizing, and we can use these materials for our plans. Okay, so if you're writing it down, you've written some ideas at the top, you've drawn a line. I said T chart earlier. I guess it's like an H. You're gonna have 3 columns below because we're gonna make 3 tiny little plans towards this goal. If we have all this materials that we're gonna weave with, I guess you could think about it as like a braid, how you have 3 plates. I'm straining my analogy a little bit. The moral of the story is we're gonna start here in this bottom left column, and that's where we're going to plan uh, your next logical step. We've envisioned a version of ourselves on October 1st, 2026. What is the next logical step between today and then that you could take that would help you get some of those good feelings, thoughts, or people or energies into your life a little bit more? You have a slide that goes into this a little bit deeper. If you want to spend more time with your dogs, taking nice hikes, the next logical step might be, all right, let me see if I can get a job at a different company that just takes some of the stress off my shoulders, whether it's new people, a different schedule, not necessarily getting a whole new field, not necessarily changing our current roles entirely, but maybe trying to find a new workplace that takes some of that stress out. That would be the most logical way to get more energy to go on hikes with my dog. Or getting a promotion or a different job with like a better schedule would, you know, make it easier for me to have fun with my coworkers rather than I only see them in the middle of the night when everyone's annoyed and tired. It might sound like coming to these sort of events, going to a career fair, connecting with old colleagues and classmates to learn more about what they're up to. The next logical step. This might feel like what you tend to think of when you sit down to plan your career. These it's logical. That is good advice. It does have some utility. So we're putting down our next logical step. What are some things I could do over the next few months that will get me closer to that ideal October 1st, 2026? That goes in that left column. In the middle column, we're going to put what would you do if what you do now no longer existed? What would you do now if what you do now no longer existed? It's kind of a tongue twister. I'll explain this thought. So this plan is all right. I am a director of student affairs. If by magic no one needs anything to do with student affairs, what could I do to help me still get closer to that ideal October 1st, 2026? What are still some of the things I could do that uh, let me take hikes with my dogs or support my daughter's hobbies? This can be kind of difficult to think about, but as I'm sure you are all aware of, we are in very volatile times. Layoffs happen, reorgs happen. It can be the case, it doesn't always happen by magic. It can be the case that what you're currently doing might not be an option for you. That is hard to think about, but I think it's better to think about in the context of when those disruptions happen, you've already kind of sketched out some thoughts centered on those ideas that give you energy, that make you feel better, that make your weeks feel a little bit lighter, rather than waiting for that big disruption to be the first time you think about it. And that's part of why things like layoffs, being terminated can be so exhausting, is that the shock of it. So just want to acknowledge that that can be a difficult way to think about career planning and future careers. But hopefully, in the context of this, you're doing it with those energizing thoughts first and not just waiting for that unforeseen obstacle to make you think about it. Here's some actions you can take or jot down in this middle column. All right, if what I do now didn't exist, what could I do that helps me spend more time with my dogs or makes me feel like I have more fun with my colleague? Maybe I would just move. Maybe I would go back home where I grew up and start over. Maybe the only reason I'm in this city is because of the job I had. And if it didn't exist, well, what a perfect excuse. I could finally move. Maybe I would uh, go back to school or return to a role that I had before that and pick up from there. If student in my case, if student affairs didn't exist, maybe I'd go back to being a recruiter. Um, or you could do the same. You might see in these plans already that you're starting to list the same sort of actions. Like it's kind of always a good idea to reconnect with old folks. So if what I did now no longer existed, maybe I would connect with some of the people I met in my museum studies certificate course and see what they're up to. How did they navigate change? What titles have they gotten over the years? That could be something I want to do between now and that October 1st date. And then the final piece of this particular plan, which is kind of a reward for thinking about the harder question of what would you do if you had to change, is what would you do if you could do anything? We also present these plans in this order. So if you do this activity on your own, uh, I still want you to go through those 3 steps of what's the most logical plan I could make, what's kind of a more conservative plan of what would I do if I had to make a change. And then you get to end on this note of what would you do if you could do anything? Money's no object. Your risks will pay off. What would you do between now and October 1st, 2026 that would bring you more in alignment with those energizing things you named? More time with your dogs, more time with your kids, having more fun with the people in your life, whatever your version of that is. And I want to push y'all to spend time with this. We won't be able to do it too much together, but I want you to really think about that question because we tend to skip it. We tend to think, oh, that's a little too silly. That's not real. Let me kind of gloss over that. Really, what would you do if you could do anything? And to help you think about that, I'm going to give you an example of when I did this activity with a client, what it looked like for them. Obviously, I changed some of the details so that it would be not their exact life, but at the top, they thought about, okay, a year from now, what do I want more in my life? Who do I want to be in my life? What do I want to spend my time on? And they wanted to focus on having a fun wedding. They wanted to have energy to go to the gym. You could substitute your own hobbies for this. And they wanted to get a dog. They lived in an apartment. They weren't making enough money to get a dog. So being able to be in a position where they finally could have a dog was really important to them and seemed pretty achievable from a year out. So what they put in their 3 columns, what's the next logical step? Uh, they thought, okay, stay in my current title, but I could go to a different company. Maybe it has a higher pay, and that will help me plan this wedding, save up for this dog. Um, that would be that would be the most logical thing. In the middle column, what would they do if their current work, talent acquisition, no longer existed? They're like, I don't know. I would probably go work in a nonprofit animal shelter. I could take some of the skills that I've learned here in my workplace and help them raise funds to take care of those animals. And that would definitely help me get a dog because I'd be in that scene. I'd be able to spend more time with them. And if what would they do if they could do anything? We still haven't really found a fun word for it, but they really like tea. And they're like, whoever's the person that makes tea, that mixes teas flavors up, I would do that. If I could do anything, money was no object. That would just be so fun. I would love to learn about it. It would probably let me travel in really interesting ways. That's what they would do if they could do anything. So I wanted to share that example because you might have put something that's a little too logical in that column. So I really urge you to think beyond the usual. And at the bottom, what they did, which is what you could take away, is some of those steps. What are the things they could do that would help them reach these goals over the next year? For them, they are going to reconnect with someone who went freelance with their career just to see what does it mean to be freelance? What does it mean to do this work? They ended up taking a class at a neighborhood tea shop. Maybe they won't ever become the person to make tea blends, but it doesn't mean they can't, spend more time with this hobby that they find so exciting. And they did end up volunteering at an animal shelter, focusing more on their annual fundraisers. This particular person ended up getting a job at a different company like they planned, but they returned to their original company. They did that boomerang, feeling a lot more energized and a little bit closer to having the weeks that they envisioned. And it was only a year out. So you do this process, you you can dust it off in 3 months and try it again. So that is just a quick little snapshot of what career weaving could look like. And I want to end with this thought. I got about a minute left. If you have to go straight to something that starts at 1, I totally get it. But I want to make sure I bring in this quote from Hermiana Ibarra, who wrote Working Identity, that most of us, when we think about planning new careers, we know what we are trying to escape: the lockstep of a narrowly defined career, inauthentic or unstimulating work, numbing corporate politics, a lack of time for life outside work. But finding an alternative that truly fits is not a problem that can be solved overnight. It takes time. It takes time. It takes little activities. It takes talking about people. It takes coming to workshops like this. So hopefully you have a new way of thinking about careers, a little exercise that you can start practicing these concepts. And if you weren't able to fill it out with me on this quick 30-minute session, I totally get it. I would encourage you to continue thinking about having multiple little plans that you revisit and trying to think about, instead of planning one career for the rest of your life, how can you be in the practice of weaving these things that bring you energy into your life and being open to the random chaotic things that happen. Okay, that's all the time I have. Thank you so much for joining me for the past 30 minutes. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time, and I highly recommend talking to some folks about some of your career plans that you made. You'd be surprised. You never know who's going to be the person that gives you that next Slack message that has the job that you're looking for.